Hello everyone, my name is Brian and welcome back to Now This Is Podcasting. So this week I wanted to bring back on everyone's favorite Lore Master of Mandalore, Tad Lar'ken. And I want to go through a few of our favorite Force sects in the expanded universe. So I wanted to bring you back on just because I think that the last time that we talked, it was very obvious that we were just going to run through every single topic under the sun involving Star Wars or Lord of the Rings or whatever. And you and I were talking a little bit on Discord, and I wanted to get your kind of opinion on, in the expanded universe, what your favorite Force sect was, because there's so many to pick from. It's not just the Jedi Order, which I feel like a lot of people who just have like a glancing understanding of Star Wars, they're like, okay, it's the Jedi versus the guys with the red lightsaber. They might not even necessarily know that the Sith exist, or like Darth Bane's like rule of two and that line of Sith order. But I really wanted to pick your brain, because I kind of consider you like encyclopedic knowledge, like you're like a walking Wikipedia for Star Wars. So
that's very generous. I hope I'm better than Wikipedia, but
your brain can't be selectively edited by just any random passerby.
Well, yeah, that and having non-biased things written would be great too. But yeah, it's interesting too, because not only are there different other sects, but the Jedi and Sith religions, if you want to call them, have grown and evolved over the years, because these are millennia old ideologies that don't encompass the entire view of the Force. And every so often, like, the Jedi will die off in a purge, and then a new Jedi Order will start, and whoever starts that Jedi Order will say, okay, well, maybe we'll do this differently. Or the Sith will go through reorganizations, which to them is just killing each other until there's one or two left.
A self-purge, if you will.
Yes, more like an internal purge. And then they say, okay, well, maybe we should do this differently. Like, Bane was a radical. Because before then, for thousands of years, there were multiple Sith Lords. There weren't just two.
And I always kind of consider the Brotherhood of Darkness to be like the weakest version of the Sith, because they're kind of painted in that light, like in the Bane, books.
With Drew Karpyshyn's novels, they're definitely. I equate them to the Roman Empire when they were collapsing.
Like the last like dying like breath of a weak version of a government, basically.
Right, where you have these multiple emperors and they're all weak and pompous and inbred, and it's just utter chaos. And then Bane came and said, enough of this. He basically introduced what we in our consider Darwinism into their Sith Order.
And that's something that like I really liked about that book, was the very first Darth Bane like novel, was that Bane from the very beginning kind of is questioning, at first, like, he kind of fails and he's like, maybe I'm just, super weak and maybe I'm not actually meant to be here, like on the Sith Academy. And after like he like, fails and like dives into like the old teachings of like all of the old Sith Lords, and they're basically like their ideology is just the strongest survives and the weakest dies off, but they didn't have like that rule of there's only one.
They didn't have that structure.
They didn't have that structure to it. They were just like, it was like the Wild West. Anyone could kill anyone at that point.
I mean, just look at the SWTOR MMO. I haven't, but reading up on it, and it's just like this ladder of different Sith Lords killing each other. Like, Malgus comes back a couple times, and it's just
I believe it
utter
actually
chaos.
Is twice that he comes back.
Twice he comes back?
So in the most recent expansion, Onslaught, which I have actually not played yet, like I've told you before that like so many hours of my life like went to SWTOR and hundreds of my dollars. But the Onslaught DLC came out, and like they basically updated the graphics of every NPC and every character, like including Malgus. Like Malgus looks amazing, like in the Onslaught DLC, and then you standing next to Malgus, you just look like this weird like claymation person, unless like you pay for like skins or whatever. But So Malgus dies off 2 separate times in SWTOR, and one of the things that always kind of like made me question, and this is something that I've always thought about, the Sith in general when they were like large scale. Like Palpatine's order was obviously 2 people and maybe some sprinklings of secret apprentices here and there, but for the large part, for the largest part, most people were not aware that Palpatine was a Sith Lord. They just like were not aware of that. He didn't want them to know that, and Vader was kind of like this mythic big bad. But this like the Empire and SWTOR and the Brotherhood of Darkness and stuff like that, I could not possibly understand why anyone in the Star Wars galaxy would like willingly join that empire, basically. But like SWTOR was always confusing to me because it's very evident just from like looking at the Jedi and the Sith in those in SWTOR that okay, the Sith are clearly evil, like slave traders and like terrible people. So I never understood why anyone would willingly join those empires. You know what I mean?
I could kind of see from high turnover rate and chance for I'm trying to make it sound like a job application resume. High turnover rate and chance for moving up. I think that's the only real incentive.
Exactly.
If you're a powerful Sith Lord, like, oh yeah, I could take that guy. Basically.
And there's a lot of that in SWTOR. There's a lot of backstabbing and whatnot, and that's what I liked so much about the Rule of Two is that establishment of one Master, one Sith. The Brotherhood of Darkness. When I was first reading the Bane novel, I was like, okay, this is pretty interesting, but I am partial to the Darth titles. Like I like when Sith Lords like have a secret alter ego that is like their Sith title and like their Darth title, and then maybe they have like a front for their public face, which is what I liked about like Bane's Rule of Two was that Bane had an alter ego, like how he conducted his business like on a day-to-day basis. Same thing with Darth Xana and Plagueis, like he was like a massive banker, like he just seemed like a pretty normal guy probably to most people, and I like that like secrecy of the Rule of Two era of Sith. You know what I mean?
That's what made them dangerous.
Exactly.
Whereas in SWTOR and KOTOR and the Tales of the Jedi and all those comics and novels before, they were just this big juggernaut of people. And with all of that, it introduced secrecy and it introduced like you don't know anybody could be a Sith Lord. I was gonna say towards the end, like of the Clone Wars, and especially in Labyrinth of Evil, they're all scrambling to find the Sith Lord because it's become evident that there is said to Obi-Wan was the truth, and that there is a Sith Lord in the Senate. So Mace Windu goes on this whole chase through the catacombs, trying to find the secret Sith, and Quinlan Vos does the same thing in the comics, and they find that all these secret tunnels leading to Palpatine's secret lair on Coruscant in the works all lead directly to 500 Republica, where all of the senators stay.
So at that point, it could be like literally anybody in the Senate.
Yeah, and that's what was just like like the oh shit moment for them.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's what I like so much about Palpatine in general is I know that some people have like the criticism of his character that the way that he's written, like any accidental like slip up in Star Wars could be explained away by Palpatine did it. But that's what I like about him is that he is so conniving that you could believe that he's like the chess master. He's playing both sides of this war, and it's purely for his own means. Like he knows what he's doing, and that's what makes the Sith, like the Darth Bane line of like Sith Lords. That's what makes them so dangerous is that they're trained not only to be very powerful in the Force and to like actually bend and warp the the Force to their wills, but on top of that, like they're taught to be essentially spies. Mm-hmm. And the Plagueis novel, I feel, kind of didn't necessarily show a version of Plagueis that I 100% loved.
Yeah, especially when he lets. So I always interpreted as he let Palpatine train Maul as more of a Sith assassin and less than an apprentice. And I was actually surprised to find that he survived all the way up until midway through Phantom Menace, where
Yeah, it's
in
the
Revenge of
same
the
here, man.
Sith, Palpatine makes it sound like he killed him off years ago, or what you infer.
That was like probably the biggest shocker to me in that book was he's alive for so long.
He's alive right up until he's elected as Chancellor.
Like in episode 1, Plagueis is somewhere in the background, and I like that like bit of storytelling. I like that little bit of world building that Palpatine, when he's elected to be the Supreme Chancellor, he's like walking on air. He's like 100% like ahead in the clouds. He's just like, my plan's coming together, and I am now the master of the Sith.
And it's what makes Palpatine so dangerous is the rule of 2 is designed so that each succeeding Sith Lord is more powerful than the other. So he has thousands of years, well, not thousands, 1,000 years of
Sith teachings and Sith sorcery.
To where he was the apex Sith at that point. He did what Bane designed the rule of 2 to do, which was eradicate the Jedi. Obviously, he didn't do that completely. However, he at least thought he did, and he got pretty close.
He did a pretty good job. Like, that's like one of the things that I bring up in some of my legacy videos is that the Jedi Purge in that is probably one of the worst and like weakest Jedi Purges out of all of the various Jedi Purges.
Nihilist's Jedi Purge has nothing on it.
Yeah, like so many Jedi make it out in Star Wars Legacy. Like in that first opening issue, they kind of painted out that like a bunch of Jedi, like a ton of Jedi are killed off, but I don't have in my mind, I never really had like that understanding that there was as many Jedi as there was during, the height of the Republic. I kind of view the Jedi as still being somewhat smaller, more like in line with how Luke's Jedi Order kind of had them set up. Like they weren't this massive, $20, $30, $40,000 like army like of Jedi, like, Force wielders. They were like more like monks, and they were a lot more in line with how the Force actually flows and works, and less of like a dogmatic religion. You know what I mean?
True. But you also have to remember that I don't know around the time of comics if they still maintained some of their other Jedi temples and academies, but I know at least during like the Fate of the Jedi novels and that bit of the Legacy era before the big time gap between that and Star Wars Legacy, the comics, Luke's Jedi Order had, they had a Jedi temple on Coruscant that they rebuilt. I believe they still maintained the Yavin,
like the Jedi Praxium there.
They had a academy on Dathomir, and they had another academy on not New Alderaan, but
there's that one where a lot of the Jedi go to hide out there when Jason Solo's going totally crazy, but I can't remember what planet it's on.
And during the Yuuzhan Vong War, they had a temporary academy in the Maw installation, actually.
Which I love, like, that portion of Star Wars. Like, I'm actually weirdly partial to the Yuuzhan Vong stuff. I feel like a lot of people don't love it.
That honestly is the era I've done the least amount of looking into. Not because I side with anybody that doesn't like it, just because they take everything you see in Star Wars and then they do the opposite. And a lot for me to get into them. I will eventually cover them, but it's something I need to do. I've started a little bit more because my book collection is a lot of Old Republic, post Return of the Jedi, up until Yuuzhan Vong War and Legacy era stuff. I only have maybe about 3 of the era novels that but every time I go to a used bookstore, which has been less frequent now because things are a lot closed or have limited capacity. Yeah, precisely. I pick those up whenever I can.
It's a huge list of books. Like it's a massive
undertaking. It's a long.
I think it's 19 books.
Yeah,
and that can be very daunting. And I understand that like people feel like they just kind of do a lot of like swaths of like deaths and stuff like that. But I think that what I liked so much about it was I just wanted something different from just Jedi versus Sith, or like Jedi versus like another, world destroying super weapon. I liked the
It
idea of
wasn't
like this.
another Death Star. It wasn't
Yeah.
another Imperial warlord trying to uh, reconsolidate the Empire again. It was something completely different.
And I know that people like think that it's like a little bit of a Star Trekky type of villain, but I'm kind of into that. Like I like that this new generation of Jedi, like Jason and Anakin and Jaina and all those Jedi, like they had their own massive, insane battle to fight.
Could you consider Luke's new Jedi Order basically a Jedi sect? Because he had very different, radically different rules.
See,
Before.
I would consider it a whole different Jedi Order because
Because he allowed marriage, which, as we know from watching the prequels, was a big no-no with the old Jedi.
and on top of that, like he basically had no idea how the Jedi of the Old Republic ran. Like he had no clue until there's a book where R2D2 essentially shows him the plot of Episode 3. And up until like there was like once the prequel started to come out, they were releasing books that were where Luke was like finding out more information.
Pieces, right?
Yeah, bits and pieces. But he had already at that point basically established his own Jedi Order, who they already had their own brand new identity, and they were more in line with how I viewed, like when I was a kid. I'm sure when you were a kid, like watching the original trilogy for the first time and like hearing them talk about the mighty Jedi Knights and stuff like that. I had this vision in my head of all these different aliens and humans, and I kind of thought of them as like Green Lanterns. Like they all had their own cultures and customs, but they were all united as being Jedi Knights. And that's kind of what Luke's Jedi Order is, because like, they're taking in people that are 40 or 50 years old and making them Jedi Knights.
Leia became a Jedi Master at what, 50?
Yeah, it took her a little bit of a run to get there, but she got there eventually.
Well, she was busy, being president of the New Republic, so
she was busy forming an entire government off of the destruction of the formal galactic government.
Right.
But I would say that I would consider like Luke's Jedi Order and the Jedi of the Old Republic like completely different Force sects, because they are so different, like allowing compassion, like emotion and love and all this different stuff. They're built off of probably what the Jedi Order was originally meant to be, that like it strayed so far away from.
Right. Well, if you remember reading in the Tales of the Jedi comics, those Jedi were also allowed to marry. Nomi Sunrider had a husband and a kid.
And they eventually just became more dogmatic and political over time.
Right, and that can also be attributed to the new Sith Wars with Bane and the reformation of the Rule of Two and all of that.
And the fact that this is something that I feel like a lot of people forget, is that there were a lot of Jedi who became Supreme Chancellors that were literally running the government. And so it's basically like the Pope becoming the President of the United States, which...
Shameless plug incoming. Watch my video, Every Supreme Chancellor Ever, to learn more.
I have seen that. Actually, I have seen that video, and I would highly recommend it. I think I was telling you the other day that I was just like binge watching a bunch of your old videos. I'm a sucker for anything Legacy era related, so I watched like your like what is the Fel Empire and stuff like that.
Yeah, that one's becoming really popular.
Yeah, I love it because like I don't feel like
I'm kind of embarrassed because I made a couple mistakes in it, but
I like that you compare the Imperial mission to being basically like their version of a religion, which I would agree with.
Basically is.
Yeah, because like I mean, it's their outreach into like the community, because I think that they understood. They're like, look, we know we have a really bad reputation because we're the Empire, but look, we're a different empire now. Like we're not
right. It's like if the Nazis came back, it was like, look, no, we've
changed. I promise, we've changed.
Yeah, no, the Jews are fine. They're great.
We love all minorities equally.
Yes.
They had some like really great looking like stormtrooper armor for aliens. Like I think that stuff is awesome. Like I think that's why I like Legacy so much. I'm sure that people who watch our videos like on a regular basis are sick of hearing me talk about how much I love Legacy,
Mhm.
but you know that like I'm a huge sucker for the Imperial Knights. Like I just
Right.
think that they're super fascinating, and Roan Fell's like Imperial Knight armor is probably one of the best designs of any Star Wars character ever, and it flies completely under the radar because I mean he looks like I think like a lot of Game of Thrones fans can identify with this that it looks like the Jaime Lannister's armor when he's the Hand of the King. Like he looks dope. Like he looks so cool. And I feel like a lot of people forget that the Fell Empire is essentially like what if a Skywalker went on to become the Emperor, but like a benevolent Emperor and not the big bad that we're all used to.
He
And
he kind of reminded me of like the old like Chinese emperors, where they were more revered and instead of like feared.
he's like deified basically.
Yeah.
People follow him no matter what until all of a sudden they very suddenly don't, and then he gets killed. But um, I think that if I were to like toss in a vote for probably my favorite Force sect that isn't the Jedi Order or the Sith, it would probably be the Imperial Knights. And I just like that they serve the Force through like a person. So it's basically like, Knights of the, like England and stuff like that. They would serve their religion through their king, who, a lot of the kings of England claim to, be hand selected by God. And I like that the Imperial Knights are this kind of like gray Force users out there in the world who are just as deadly as the Sith or the Jedi.
Right. It's like if the Imperial. They're basically the Imperial Guard
Mm-hmm.
as Jedi. And I like how they're given uniforms and they don't have different lightsaber colors. And I thought silver was an interesting choice because
I
it's
really
neutral.
like that, like that across the line, like uniformity of the Empire, but like put into the lens of like the Jedi Knights essentially.
But the, the they don't serve Emperor Roan Fel. They serve whoever is the Emperor. And
Mm-hmm.
that's where their moral dilemma comes in. Because now you have Crate coming in and saying, well, I'm the Emperor now. Screw Roan Fel.
He's
I
like,
took
I'm the
half
Emperor
of
now, and P.S. I don't like any of you, and I will kill you. So
right. Here is my one Sith, except I have a bunch of Sith, so
like I wanted to get your opinion about the One Sith and like how you felt about them as like a Force sect.
so I think it's just the natural next step to the rule of two.
Mm-hmm.
Because the rule of two was uh, one craves the power, the other holds it, and it's just this stair climbing. But once you get to the top of that stair, there can be only one. You
The
know,
Highlander.
precisely, more or less. But I view it as the next natural evolutionary step in their ideology because they're so self-centered and their entire belief system is based around serving themselves. They don't serve others like the Jedi, they serve themselves. So, such a selfish system, it makes sense for there to only be one all powerful Sith holding the title
The
of
most
Sith
selfish of
Lord.
all the Sith.
Right.
I think that what I I probably wouldn't say that the One Sith are like my favorite version of the Sith, but what I like so much about the One Sith is that they're indoctrinated from birth. Like they're born into the system of being Sith lords, and they're very xenophobic, and they almost have like their own opinions. Like you're born into a dogmatic religion, you live your entire life by that dogmatic religion, and your god is like a living being that you can actually interact with, being Darth Krayt. And he just goes into like hibernation and just disappears for like 20 or 30 years at a time, and
And
you don't hear anything from him.
right. And I like how there's different lines. Like Darth Rylock the Third. That means there was 2 Darth Rylocks before him, and I'm guessing that was his father and grandfather, all who served Darth Krayt and tried to keep him alive all those years.
I believe one of them was his. I think that Darth Warlock the Third was the son, like hit the previous one. I believe was his mom.
Oh, okay.
I think. Don't quote me on that. I'm sure that somebody is like very rapidly Googling to argue with me about about whether or not that's accurate.
I'm sure somebody will post it in the comments.
Yeah, but like I actually like Darth Warlock a lot. I like that I can't remember the name of Palpatine's like right hand man in the Senate. Like,
oh yes, he was the same species.
Exactly. His name escapes me at the moment, but I like that.
It's bugging me now because I know it. Why?
I want to Google it.
It's I'll continue.
I was like, are you gonna try and remember it offhand? But I like that Warlock, like he knows all of Krayt's secrets. Like he is fully aware that Krayt is dying. Like he's definitely not going to. He's not this immortal being. He's sick. He's infected with the Vong. Like he knows that he's probably not going to be around for much longer, and like he's actively hunting for answers and solutions to keep Krayt alive. And I like that idea that there's only one person that Krayt is vulnerable with. And I like this idea that Krayt is, he's existed through all these generations. He lived through, the Jedi Purge and like the fall of the Old Republic. He lived through like the lawlessness of like what came after, like in between the Empire and, the Republic. And he lived through the Yuuzhan Vong War. And he eventually just came out as like this super all-knowing, like crazy looking Sith Lord. Mm-hmm. And I like that the Imperial Knights and the one Sith are essentially the same thing, because the Imperial Knights they're born and raised in the Fel Empire, and they're raised to believe that the Empire is like the Emperor is like the chosen one. You serve the Force through serving your Emperor, and it's the same thing that the one Sith believe. Like the one Sith believe they're serving the dark side, and they have the answer through serving Krayt. And I like that the one Sith also have like that sense of secrecy to them, like the same way that the Rule of Two Sith have, because they were just hiding on Korriban for decades without like anybody noticing. And I like that Luke interacts with Darth Krayt during the Fate of the Jedi stuff.
Yep.
And that he's been around for that long.
And how Lumaya is almost it's I don't remember if it's confirmed, but it's heavily implied that Lumaya was acting on Krayt's behalf.
I think they extended her an invitation to join the One Sith, and she was like, No. I'm gonna make sure that I destroy Luke Skywalker's entire psyche.
Well, she had personal problems with him. The fact that they used to date.
Yeah. I always like forget about that happened like in all that old Marvel stuff. That always slips my memory about Lumaya.
And that's what's brilliant about the Marvel comics, is that they're S-canon, so whatever can actually fit into the whole canon is taken, and I like how they're able to do that. And
they pick some crazy stuff to put like in like the former expanding universe, or what I would probably consider, what I'm sure you and I both consider our canon, is the quote unquote legend stuff.
I like to call it the old canon. It tastes better going down. Legends.
It also sounds like a cool like little club,
Yeah, it almost sounds like the Old Testament,
Yeah.
First of all, it's Massa Amida, by the way. That's his name.
It was like right there. Like it was like I could like.
I'm ashamed to admit it, but I literally had to look up the blue guy next to Palpatine.
And he actually plays like a weirdly larger role in the new expanding universe, like in the Disney stuff. Like he's weirdly way more involved. Like
is he in Rebels at all?
I don't think he is, but he gives like a big massive speech like in one of the new canon Star Wars comics, where he's like, the Jedi are dead, and they were the bad guys the whole time, and we're the best. And like he literally is like throwing lightsabers into a furnace, and it's like it's crazy to see like the government go from. I mean, it must have been very bizarre for like the regular citizen to see the government go from, oh, we're the Republic, to, oh, now we're an empire, and these guardians of peace that we've always known. The voice for the Chancellor is just throwing lightsabers into a furnace. So if you were to like probably put like your finger on what your favorite Force sect was.
See, that's tough because
Exactly.
as a guy that I'm interested in Star Wars, not in the same way that everybody else is interested. I'm interested in the non-Force users. I like the regular people. I like the fringe types, the smugglers, the ones whose answers to their problems is their blaster, not their ideology or their lightsaber. But it is,
and I definitely get that from the Tad Larkin character.
right, because Tad Larkin isn't Force sensitive. I could have made myself this, instead of being a Mandalorian, I could have been this, Jedi lore master, kind of like what's his face, Nostarel or Jocasta Nu. But I decided, no, I like Mandalorians, and plus I already had the costume. So
there you go.
Recently, I've been reading a lot about the Dathomir witches, and
Mm-hmm.
I find it interesting their view of the Force, because they don't view. Now, this is going pre TCW stuff. They kind of mucked some stuff about here, but pre TCW, they viewed the Force as more of like a magic. They didn't view it as, it's this ideology of there's good and bad, and that there's microscopic organisms in their bloodstream. To them it's this mystical thing, kind of going back to what we all used to think the Force was before the prequels happened, and said, oh, they're just microscopic organisms in your bloodstream. I always thought they're basically like gray Jedi, where if you subscribed to the gray Jedi theory, I personally don't, but where they view the Force as a tool to use their magic through. And
Mm-hmm.
most of the time they try to use their magic for good. The Night Sisters use it for evil, but that's a whole different thing. And the fact that they manipulate Rancors into being their pets, I find amazing as well. But no, I've been reading a lot into them recently because I'm doing a video on them. And the first Dathomir witch was a Jedi. It was like some 600 years before the movie. She was ousted from the Jedi Order because she was looking into what would be considered heretical for them stuff. She was looking at like Sith methods of Sith Force manipulation. So she was kicked out of the Order because they had the whole new Sith Wars a couple hundred years earlier, and they decided, yeah, no, let's try to avoid that from happening again. So
we don't need another war.
She's exiled to Dathomir, where she finds these descendants of these lost prisoners from a prison colony that had been basically abandoned by this empire that fell 2,000 years beforehand, and she forged them into a fierce society of warrior women. And I thought that was just astounding.
It's like basically Star Wars Amazonians.
Yes, precisely. They're like the Amazonians, but they can use magic, and they ride big, scary bipedal monsters.
And like the witches of Dathomir have always been kind of like backwoodsy. As a person who grew up for a portion of my life in the South, I always kind of viewed them as like the backwoods, like kind of like hillbilly, like voodoo magic kind of people. And honestly, they've always scared me a little bit. Like they're a little creepy to me.
Well, the Night Sisters are creepy looking with their tattoos and all that.
And I don't have you played Fallen Order at all?
I have not, no.
So they actually play a decently heavy role in that game. At least one of them do. And the stuff that they do with the Force in that, like, which it derives mainly from the Clone Wars show.
I was gonna say, is there another army of zombies?
There's not. I mean, what? Actually, no. Yeah, there actually kind of is. Now that I think about it, but it's used probably a little bit more tastefully, and the way that I kind of think of the way they use the Force is the same way that Darth Xana used the Force, like the Sith sorcery, where they can like conjure things and like make you hallucinate and see all this crazy stuff, and they can do essentially magic with the Force. And that's something that I always found fascinating about them, was that, you know, when you think of Sith or dark side Force users, you think of people throwing Force lightning and Force choking people. You don't think of people like conjuring up, you know, gross looking Sith spawn and all this different stuff. And that's what I like about the Night Sisters, but I'm not joking. They actually freak me out a little bit. Like there's something visceral about them. Because I don't know if you ever, I don't know how much like of a fan you are of just cinema in general, but movies like The Witch, which is a movie set during like Quaker era America, and this family moves out to, they get excommunicated from their religion, which I believe they're like Quakers from my understanding, like just from my loose recollection of the movie. But they move out to the middle of nowhere and they're trying to like make it on their own. And the whole plot of the movie is there's, you're kind of second guessing yourself as to whether or not there actually are witches in the woods. And the way that the witches are represented in that, and the way that they kind of look and they kind of carry themselves, like that's kind of how I view the witches of Dathomir, is they're gangly and weird looking, and like they're very uncomfortable, like to kind of think about like the things that they do and how they carry themselves. And I don't know why it is, but like I've always had this weird phobia of witches. So the Night Sisters have always freaked me out. Like I don't do well with horror movies in general, but you know.
Oh no, I'm a giant chicken. I'm not a horror
Same.
movie guy. My girlfriend loves horror movies, and I just can't. I can't. She was mad at me because I didn't see the new It movie with her.
Oh yeah.
What was it, last year? And I was just like, I can't do that. Sorry.
But what do you think about the Darth Maul and Savage Opress stuff?
I've kind of explained it in my videos on Captain Fordo, where it's, to me, Darth Maul was always from Iridonia. That's where he was originating from in the comics, and in some of the older Episode 1 novel material. And that change didn't sit well with me, and people made so much of a fuss about it when that episode first came out, that they even included, in the subsequent episode, they even included a line where Obi-Wan Kenobi says, "Oh, wait a second, I thought Darth Maul was from Iridonia." And then they make this explanation that, oh no, he's actually from Dathomir. But the whole Night Brothers thing, I found, my first exposure to the Witches of Dathomir was the courtship of Princess Leia. And everything that TCW portrayed Dathomir as, and the Night Sisters as, and the whole witch culture as, is completely wrong from that standpoint. And I've never really agreed with it. And my point of view is it doesn't really fit in with the rest of the continuity, because you go from the Witches of Dathomir and Dathomir's ecology looking like it was in the show to magically being like it was in Courtship of Princess Leia, which is they're almost completely different worlds, completely different cultures. TCW shows Dathomir as they're all evil witches. You know, the Night Brothers are, you know, the separate thing. It's almost like they were like a separate society that they were just like, oh, the Night Brothers are over there. Whereas the Witches of Dathomir in the pre-TCW canon, they used their males as slaves. They did the hard labor. I don't know if you read the Republic comics with Quinlan Voss.
I have.
Infinity's End, I believe, is the comic. the comic arc where he goes to Dathomir to investigate the Infinity Gate. But he and a bunch of others, they're the slaves of these Dathomirian witches. They do all the heavy work, and I didn't see much of that with the Knight brothers in TCW. And I thought that would have been interesting for of a parallel for them to draw, but it feels like I don't want to say they didn't do their research, but I feel like they just didn't care to include some stuff that fit more in with what was portrayed beforehand. I don't know. It's just I flat out just don't like the way Dathomir and the Night Sisters were portrayed in that particular story arc.
Have you seen all of the Clone Wars? I forget how much of it you watched.
I watched up to season 5 when it was still on the air, and then I went back and watched season 6 on Netflix. But by then, I wasn't even watching season 6 to enjoy it like I was with the first original 5 seasons, because at that point I was so already expecting everything I love about Star Wars to be destroyed, because that's what this series had done in the previous couple years that it had been on the air.
Yeah.
So I already went in with the mindset of I'm just watching this to see the faults of it so I can make a video about it. And then I have not seen season 7 at all, and I really don't care to. Because even if I did consider TCW to be part of Legends, I don't think I would consider season 7 to be part of Legends, because of not just the inclusion of characters from Rebels, but just because at that point it was produced under the new Disney canon, where the original 5/6 seasons were produced under the George Lucas era.
I know that Dave Filoni in the past has said that he's just outright said, like, well, I know there's people who they think of Star Wars as how it used to be, and that's not how it is anymore. And I know that like kind of rubbed a lot of fans the wrong way, but I would definitely, like I've told you this before, that I think that out of all of the new Star Wars stuff, the Clone Wars is like the most palatable thing to me out of everything that's come out so far. And I'm sure that you've heard that episode 9 is essentially just the Dark Empire condensed into one movie. And it leaves a lot to be desired. But I don't even think that Rebels, like even Rebels, like didn't really blow me away. But then again, it's not made for me. I'm not 8, so it's not really like made. And I think that's like why, probably you and myself like all the Quinlan Vos stuff, is because that stuff is clearly like marketed towards, people who were probably between 15 to like, 30 years old. And it definitely gave the Clone Wars era of Star Wars a more gritty and like war-like feeling, which I think is
felt like a war.
Yeah, it's like that's kind of missing. Yeah, and that's what's missing in Rebels for me, is that Rebels, even though there's a lot at stake, the Empire is like literally enslaving people. That's even shown in the show. But I understand they're not going to show like hardcore like stuff in a kid show. But
it's not Amistad.
Yeah, and I think that the Mandalorian is getting more towards that style of Star Wars that we probably both really enjoy. Is it's getting us more towards that style.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like that kind of darker, grittier, backwater kind of tone.
And it focuses on the fringe type of characters that I had recently just said. I like to focus on the fringe types rather than the goody two-shoes Jedi or the big baddie Sith Lords.
Yes, I totally get that from all your videos. Because like when I first started watching your videos, I think that like I believe the very first videos I ever saw was the Clone Wars stuff and then the Legends expose and whatnot. And I can just tell from like the way, like the stuff that you review and kind of the stuff that you talk about, that a lot of the stuff that you like is the clone troopers and like bounty hunter style stuff, Mandalorian stuff. And Mandalorians are admittedly an aspect of the Star Wars universe that I'm kind of blind to. I mean, I know, like, I have like a passing knowledge of Mandalorian culture, Mandalorian lore, and stuff like that. But one of the things that they introduced in the Clone Wars that I still don't know whether or not I like is that they introduced a Force sensitive Mandalorian who becomes a Jedi. And
Oh, Tare Vizsla. I've read a little
yeah,
bit into her.
I still don't know if, because like, that Mandalorian went on to make the dark saber, and like the dark saber gets passed down between all these Mandalorian families and stuff like that. I still don't know whether I like that, because I still like the idea that
It's
the
Mandalore's
Mandalorians,
mask. Mandalore's mask is supposed to be passed down.
and that's
Not a
something that
light.
like that's something that I kind of feel like is robbed of the Mandalorians and the new stuff is the Mandalorian culture. It's a warlike kind of you know nomadic style culture that doesn't like the Force because they don't really fully understand it, and like they're more of they're
Not
like
just
we're the Warriors way.
not just that, but I'm going from a legend standpoint. I don't know how it is in their version of the Old Republic,
Mhm.
but for centuries the Mandalorians were at war with the Jedi, and they were at war. They would go to war with the Sith sometimes too. Um, they and it's explained in the Republic Commando novels that there's just a general mistrust for Force users in general, and
Yeah, I mean, I feel like most people, because it's like a religion that believes in
Mhm.
actually being able to like to influence people and like change the way they think about stuff, or like moving objects with their brain that you can actually physically see happen. So like I've always understood how from like a regular person in the galaxy how they would be freaked out by that.
right. And Mandalorians are more, material minded, where it's, show me. It's you show me the credits and I'll do the job. Don't promise me credits and then I do the job and then you don't give me credits. That's not how this works. Uh, they like to view things in tangible units, tangible measurable units for them to see.
And I think that what I like the most about like the Mandalorians, which a lot of the information I get about the Mandalorians is not only from the KOTOR games, but also from the Knights of the Old Republic comic book series, is they're like I like the idea of like the passing down of like the sacred armor, like Mandalore's helmet and his armor set and stuff like that.
Mhm.
And I like that they're like at the total reverse of like Jedi essentially. They don't like we don't believe in all this like hokey religious stuff. We just believe in conquest, and like they're essentially the Sith without being necessarily 100% evil. Outside of that time that they like literally nuked a planet into glass, but we won't talk about that. But
Or
um,
murdered the entire Cathar species almost.
yeah, they were doing some pretty problematic stuff back there in the
Juked
Old
Sirocco.
Republic. Yes, but I like that they're totally opposed to kind of the Jedi religion in general. So that's something that I still grapple with, is the whole Force sensitive Mandalorian who went on to join the Jedi Order, and then the Mandalorians become pacifists and they have like ambassadors and all this other stuff. Because I'm just like, then why are you taking away all of like this cool stuff that we
Ah,
liked about the Mandalorians?
when I first heard about that, they're like, "Oh, Star Wars finally has its first Jedi Mandalorian." I rolled my eyes, and because I knew Barden Yusik was the first Jedi Mandalorian in the Republic Commando novels. Because so Barden, basically he was a Jedi Padawan that started working a lot with the Null Arc troopers and working with Kal Skirata and all of the Mandalorian training sergeants, and the culture kind of rubbed off on him to the point
Mhm.
where he found it more attractive than his Jedi culture that he was raised in. And also, it didn't help that he viewed the war as kind of immoral, and he was questioning why the Jedi were acting in such a way, like a lot of Jedi did during the Clone Wars. And that's again something we don't see a lot of in PCW that I wish we saw more of.
And that's
But
something that I like about the Karen Travis stuff is that a lot of her stuff is like questioning the morality of using clones,
right,
like which I think a lot of people give her a lot of flack for, her just crapping all over the Jedi essentially. Like she kind of makes Luke out to be a bad guy in the legacy, like the Legacy of the Force stuff, but I think that a lot of her Republic Commando, like her Republic era stuff, is really interesting because she's diving into like why would the Jedi be okay with sending all of the like these are still living human beings, like you're sending them all into war as like
right.
disposable droids essentially, and that's like an aspect that I think the Clone Wars show shines with. Like they do a pretty good job of showing the individuality
Hmm.
of the clones, which I think it's probably
Yeah,
its strongest
I would
portion of the
agree.
show.
I would
And
definitely agree.
I remember there was a section of Jedi Knights who in the KOTOR comics left the Jedi Order and they didn't join the Mandalorians, like they weren't able to actually like become Mandalorians themselves because
Mandalorian Nights.
yeah, and the Mandalorian Knights were like the Mandalorians were still like they're with us, but we don't trust them because
Right.
they're still shifty, and we don't know that we necessarily want them around all that much. And I love the Mandalorian Knights. Like I think that it's like such a cool character design to see all of these Jedi wearing Mandalorian armor with lightsabers. It's like that's
I
dope.
as disappointing as this might sound to everyone, but I honestly need to read more into them. You think I'd be all over that because it's Jedi and a Mandalorian.
I mean,
What is there not for me to like? But I definitely need to read more into them because I actually haven't finished the entirety of the KOTOR comic series. I only own about 3 volumes of it, and the rest I'm slowly reading on Read Comic Online.
I
But
was about to say, like, if you can't get a hold of stuff, it's very easy. Like, I think that's one of the reasons why, one of the various reasons why the comic book industry started to die off is because, it's super easy to bootleg comics. It's like
yeah,
2 clicks and you have it. And
I feel bad every time I do it, but I can't find the Dark Horse stuff anymore. Anytime I go to a comic shop, it's all the Marvel stuff. And
and
if I end up finding any Dark Horse stuff, it's issues I already have.
or
So
they're like just sporadic, random issues of
yeah, or
comic series.
they're like single issues. I like buying the omnibuses and the collections because I can't I can't keep going store to store to store and like, oh, do you have this specific issue? And then go through, dusty old boxes of comics that have been touched since the 90s. And it's just a stressful thing to me. So when I can pick up individual issues, I will. Be like, oh, I really like that issue. I have it in an omnibus somewhere, but I'd like to have a single issue of it. So it's a buck. I'll buy it. But
And so like that's something that I've been struggling with whether because I think I've told you that I only own every single individual issue of 2 comic book series at all because
and that's
it's
not
incredibly
that's a feat.
yeah, that's what I was about to say. It's like impossible to keep up with that stuff. But when Legacy first came out, I remember like going to my mom and being like, "Mom, like you're never gonna believe this. There are comic books that are set 137 years after Episode 4." And she loves Star Wars, but like not like to the extent that you and I love it. So she was like, "Okay, cool. Well, how much is it?" And I was like, "It's like $350 a month." And she was like, "Sweet. Out of all of your interests, that's definitely the cheapest thing that you've ever come at me with." So I own every single individual issue of Star Wars Legacy, and I went back and tracked down all the single individual issues of the comic book series Fables. Like Fables is a comic book series it's fairy tale characters that exist in the real world in New York, and it's like this weird, like messed up, gritty version of it's. I know that's like played out. Like a lot of people have like done that type of story, but it was the original. Like it's the original story that did that, and it's beautifully written. It's beautifully executed. It has a beginning and a middle and an end, so you know where it's coming from, where it's going, and how it's going to end. So you don't need to worry about like the comic book series going on in perpetuity for the rest of time. But those are the only 2 series that I own every single issue of. Other than that, I did the same thing that you did, where I just tracked down the omnibuses. But I have been grappling with whether or not I want to purchase the Epic Collection stuff. So I
So
own, so I own a pretty decent handful of the Epic Collection stuff.
mhm.
And the reason why the kind of how I justify it in my mind is I'm like, okay, well, if people are buying these things, then Disney and Marvel will keep making them, and then maybe
Right.
one day we can have some form of continuation of these Star Wars stories. Like I want to read Sword of the Jedi. I want a continuation of like Legacy, or I want, you know, some more KOTOR stuff. And maybe if I purchase this, they're going to see those unit numbers going up, and they'll think to themselves, there is a market for this. Like there is some way to be profitable with these two universes.
Right, and that's the good aspect of it. However, there's a bad aspect of it, where as they're lumping comics into these epic collections that weren't considered canon when the expanded universe was still canon. They're
Exactly.
lumping things like Tag and Bink, sorry, brain fart. They're lumping in, you know, other silly little Tales comics that were labeled as infinities, and, you know, from the get-go, you knew these weren't canon. But to somebody who wants to get into Legends and doesn't know any better, they're going to pick up these Legends Epic collections, and they're going to be like, ah, Jay and Silent Bob were canon in Star Wars? You know?
And then
It,
you get all those like Think piece articles that
yeah,
are
then
like,
all those Gizmodo articles where it's like top dumbest things in the Star Wars expanded universe, and it's I'm gonna get a little loud here. I'm gonna bang on my desk. Skippy was not canon. Get it through your goddamn skull. Ah,
that's something that always drove me nuts. Like when Disney first bought Star Wars, was all this stuff that's like 99% of the expanding universe was garbage, and it's a good thing that it's going away. And I'm like, you've probably never even like picked up a Star Wars book in your entire life. Like
that's what it is. It's these people that are just jumping on a bandwagon, and they're just saying whatever they think people want them to say. It's all just to sell the new material. And there's a way you can sell your new material without bashing the old material, because guess what? You're still producing the old material, and you want people to buy that, right? So you probably want to quiet down press talking shit about the old material if you still want to sell units of that, if it's still in print. So that's just stuff I don't get.
I don't understand like all of these people who have not read Star Wars stories. Like I understand like they have to like get out like their word counts and stuff like that, but like the Gizmodo stuff, I mean, like they used to be owned by Gawker Media, and Gawker Media that's a whole different can of worms of terrible. And I know like how those companies work and stuff like that, and I understand that they have to like have these flashy out there, you know, type of headlines. But new fans who might be coming in to look at these things, they're, you know, I see people like in my comment section who are like, I just got into Star Wars in 2019. And I'm like, cool, man. Like, that's cool that like you're just getting into Star Wars like through the sequel trilogy. And then if they go to like, oh, well, what came before this? And they like go look up some article, it's like Skippy, the force sensitive droid. And they're like, whoa, that's way worse than the sequel stuff. And when in reality, there's the actual Star Wars canon timeline of the expanded universe is so vastly different from the way people portray it.
Mm-hmm. And
I don't know, man.
The fault also lies with the people reading the articles too. They can't take them at face value for what they are, which are shit opinion pieces by, you know, companies that put out top 10 lists of their own
Listicles.
Opinions. Yeah, they're people look at them as facts and not opinion pieces, which is what they really are. But I digress.
Yeah, I feel like you and I were so kindred spirit in our view of the old expanded universe that whenever we get on this topic, we get so heated.
Well, it's been happening for 6-7 years now, however long the expanded universe has been decanonized, and it's getting old.
It's definitely still a huge bummer to me to think about. But in conclusion, because we're coming up on an hour here, and I'm sure that Your voice is getting tired in the same way mine is.
I do need to go to bed at some point as well. I'm way past my work night bedtime.
We can talk about Star Wars for hours, but so I know that every time we talk, I always want to gas you up and push people to go and watch some of your videos. I would encourage anyone listening to this to go and watch any of Tad Larkin's videos about the expanding universe. Just literally go to his channel, pick any of them, and just put them on autoplay, because that's honestly what I do. The other night I was just sitting watching your videos on autoplay in the kitchen as I ate a cheesy quesadilla and drank a glass of whiskey. And I was just like, this will entertain me, because I wasn't in the mood to watch a movie or anything like that. They're quick, they're digestible, but if you want long form content that will reignite your love for the old expanding universe, or what we consider canon, go over to Captain Fordo. Check out any of his other videos there. They're like deep dives into stuff. One of them is basically full feature length, film length. So make sure you go ahead and check those out. Those are a good fun dive. Until next time, make sure you come back, check out Barb's Basement. Make sure you 100% go check out Mandalore. We'll see you next time on Now This Is Podcasting.
Bye.